making this video because I am experiencing existential crisis in life, and Folly's video is very touching on a topic that I had just recently discovered in the past week. Basically, the idea that someone will consider if I am considering if people consider the effects of time, the effects of evolution in a way that I do, and I don't know that if other people do. So if this video is meant for you to watch, it's possibly more because you consider the differences in perspectives that develop because of the differences of different histories, different points in time. Like if time were a timeline, kind of like how they do timelines for the branching of evolution, like animals, like the evolutionary map of animals. They kind of do this timeline thing. What I am trying to pinpoint is something related to that, but instead of it being animals, it's actually about ideas. I'm an ideas person, and the fact that we are living in 2026, I have come to the conclusion that we are cavemen living in the future. We are still very much tied to nature by hunger and by things of like the weather. Essentially, my opinion is that people have developed everything, like everything that is alive today in 2026. This includes modern plumbing. This includes Wi-Fi radio waves. This includes aquifers. This includes dams. This includes portable cooking ware. Like everything that has made life sustainable in the way that it is today is a result of evolving ideas. So we're not just evolving as physical creatures like bodies and animals. We're not just evolving like that. We're also evolving in ideas. And that's what's interesting to me. And Folly is touching on this idea that this video is about philosophy hot takes. How do I do this? This video is about philosophical hot takes. Well, my philosophical hot take is that most people do not appreciate the differences in life today in 2026 in comparison to people 2,000 years ago. The best way to say it is we have more in common with people 200 years from now than we have in common with people 2,000 years ago. And I'm referencing, I guess, the time of 0 BC when, I guess, Jesus Christ was considered to be alive. My background is that I was born into Catholicism and I identify with Catholicism. I just don't have the fundamentalist mentality in like everything written in a biblical text is made by a higher power. I believe that they were people who were alive in those times, and their perspectives was influenced by the times that they were in. I believe that if there was a new Bible written, it would have been based off the perspectives of people alive in the time that we are in. So if the Bible were to be rewritten in today's time, it would include things like Wi-Fi. It would include things like internet. It would include it would include the innovation of medicine, or even the concept, la Brian Johnson, that we can innovate our way to becoming immortal, and maybe not immortal, but age reversal in effect. All of these ideas are ideas of the modern times, because every development that has occurred in human history has brought us to where we are right now. And so it's very likely that people it's very likely that people 100 years from now will think that we are stupid, like we think people from 200 years ago were less intelligent based on them not knowing things that we know today, like ability to create a vaccine, or ability to it is like, for example, like knowing that bacteria exist. It is like using a sponge that's in your sink to clean something. That doesn't clean anything. It doesn't clean anything, because the sponge already has bacteria, and so therefore you're just spreading the bacteria onto your spoons and your forks and your plates. That does not clean. I guess there are people that still believe that brushing off grease, or using a sponge and soap, is like dish soap, is going to clean the thing, but it doesn't clean it, because technically clean is defined as absence of bacteria. You're just putting more bacteria, especially if the sponge is wet, especially if the sponge is touching the like not just the sink, but like the drain. Like I would imagine there's more bacteria in the drain. So all of these ideas are ideas that have evolved through, I guess, what they call the Age of Enlightenment. And I don't recall if that was before or after the Renaissance, but all of these titles of eras have a title because there was something occurring in that era that was new in comparison to the times of before. And so I'm gonna react to I guess he was just expressing that something related to religion, but I'm not sure because I paused it there.
On hot, especially for like a kind of more literary crowd, I suppose. There is a point to this. In fact, if you were to ask me like 5 years ago, I probably would have told you something like this take. And I'll tell you the reason why I eventually stopped believing in it. So I think the underlying assumption in this is that all knowledge, or all important knowledge, is propositional, right? It can be distilled down into, as this person quite neatly puts it, bullet point format, or otherwise be enumerated in a set of propositions and propositional arguments. That was a position that I once held, and so I can kind of understand it, right? The worry, I think, behind that view of the world is that you don't want to let in lots of what we might call like woo-woo nonsense, right? You want to have some way of discriminating between types of knowledge or acquisition that are like worth your time, and types of purported knowledge that are not worth your time. And one way of doing that is to say, well, everything worth knowing is the kind of thing that you can put in a well-formed propositional argument, and anything else is kind of nonsense or otherwise like too woolly to really count. And I really sympathize with that, right? Because you can't let everything through the door. There has to be some kind of gatekeeping of what counts as full-blown things worth knowing, or things that are, admit of knowledge ascription. However, I do think there are important forms of knowledge.
Right, because there are billions and trillions of things that you can do or watch, and there are not enough human hours I counted. We are like alive for like 12,000 days. Maybe not. It might be more than that, but I don't remember why I included that number. But what I'm trying to say, there is a limited amount of days that people are alive for, and it's in the thousands. It's not in the millions. It's people live for like 10,000 plus days. Because if you consider that there are 365 days in a year, then let's say you multiply that by 80 years, whatever that amount of days is, let's say that's the typical lifespan. Well, you don't have enough hours to watch everything that's being uploaded. And so this is why I've adopted the view on my own. No one really taught me this. I am the one I'm original to this idea, that I view YouTube or social media as like a time machine, because maybe people, you watch you get recommended a video that's like 15 years old, and you're like, wow, like this is like a time capsule. And so I'm gonna watch the video for now.
That fall outside that. A really good example of this, this is Polanyi's classic example, is of riding a bike. I think I've brought this up before. Riding a bike is an example of procedural and tacit knowledge. That is, it's procedural in that I couldn't, explain to you in propositional form how I ride a bike, and I couldn't teach you how to ride a bike merely propositionally. And it's also tacit because even non-propositionally, I couldn't verbalize what exactly I'm doing. It relies on a whole heaps of like implicit knowledge and kind of muscle memory and that kind of thing. So like, riding a bike is a classic example of something that we kind of want to call knowledge, or at the very least is like useful to have, let's say, as an ability. If you want kind of, if you think knowledge is too controversial a label to put there, I'm not really married to the label. However, it's clearly like worth knowing how to ride a bike in the same way that it's worth knowing how to do lots of things. Let's talk about, knowing how, let's say procedural knowledge. And I think that is the kind of thing that literature actually can be very good at, right? So one counter-argument to this kind of idea that the contents of a book, or the important contents of a book, is exhausted by its kind of point-by-point enumeration of its key themes and key ideas, is to say something like, well, you get some kind of procedural knowledge from it. And in fact, this is how people often defend the act of reading and the act of kind of engaging with fiction as a whole. They tend to say something like, well, you don't just gain a series of proposed propositions, you also get the experience of relating to characters and things like that. And that could be a way to kind of train your kind of empathy and your theory of mind, or what have you. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is to say, well, even if it's true that you could take all of the propositional content of a narrative and kind of put it in a bullet point list, it's significantly more compelling when it's put in narrative form. And that's important, right? That's not like a trivial side constraint. That's a key part of not just presenting a proposition, but getting someone to absorb it kind of right into their bones, to kind of use a kind of metaphorical exploration of that. Like, I'm sure that right now there are loads of things and loads of kind of life lessons and propositional ideas that you will have that you won't have fully integrated into your life, right? Because to fully integrate an idea into your life does not just require a proposition to be cognitively and intellectually accepted. It also requires there to be an internal drive-based, instinctive, emotional shove towards it. And I think that is one of the things that storytelling and fiction is great at achieving. So, this is kind of the reason why I think Jesus told parables, right? When, regardless of whether you think Christianity is true or not, I'm an agnostic, Jesus was one of the most successful teachers in history, and his stories and ideas have probably had more impact than literally every other thinker in history. So, even from a secular perspective, the guy was really good at his job, let's say. And I think a big part of this is the fact that he tells parables. You won't turn to, halfway through the book of John and you'll find, well, Jesus has got all his disciples sat around and he says, well, premise one of my argument is this, premise two is this, and if we invoke modus ponens, we would find the conclusion that from those is this. I'm not saying those kind of arguments have no value. In fact, I love those kinds of arguments. But I think that one of the reasons why Jesus's teachings were so compelling and continue to be compelling for many people today is that they are wrapped up in these amazing narratives and parables. And this could be like a pro and a con, right? Because just because something is wrapped up in a compelling narrative doesn't mean that it is a worthwhile idea or that it is true. But it might mean that if the idea is true or worthwhile, then the narrative format is part of what will help it kind of sink into your soul, for want of a better term, and compel you towards action. There's even I think there's even some kind of data behind. I'm always like hesitant to cite psychological data because I know so much of it can't be replicated. But I have come across data that may or may not be replicable that suggests that when people kind of inhabit a character or inhabit a kind of figure in a narrative, that allows them to perform certain tasks with more ease. I think the one that they did was like they told children to kind of complete an exercise, and then they said, pretend you're Batman and complete the exercise, and the children who pretended to be Batman would kind of sit down and kind of grit at it for longer. And that's kind of a trivial example, but my point is that it illustrates that inhabiting characters and narratives is valuable aside from the propositional content of the themes of a book, because they engage our affects and our instincts in a way that their propositional arguments just tend to struggle with. Maybe you can be presented with a propositional argument and you'll change all your behavior on a dime, but I don't think that holds for most people. It certainly doesn't hold for me, unfortunately. So yeah, separate from the kind of fact that, as you point out, that reading something in a narrative can be more enjoyable, which I don't think is like a trivial constraint. Enjoyment is important, right? I think that can be kind of part of a justification for why, in addition to merely laying out a set of messages, a narrative story is like not just kind of like a decorative gloss on those messages. It adds something pretty substantive. I think it's important to like have beautiful experiences. I wouldn't frame them in like strong metaphysical terms, like experiencing the beauty or the form of the beautiful. But I would say that the subjective felt experience of beauty is very important, and I don't think it's arbitrary. Just because I think something is stance dependent doesn't mean that I think it's arbitrary. But I think I mentioned that before. So but yeah, I'd say this is a pretty hot take. I disagree with it for the reasons that I've given, but I'd be interested to hear what you think, because actually, I think that people are very quick to dismiss this kind of perspective out of hand. And no, it does require an answer, right? It is not like a trivial thing. People often read this kind of thing and they just kind of say, this is anti-intellectualism. But like, that's not a response. Sometimes anti-intellectualism can be justified, right? That is not in and of itself a reason to reject something. You have to demonstrate that it has missed something. And I think I've done that here, but I'd be really interested to know what you think. And I'd be interested to kind of hear the other side. Because as I said, I held this position for a pretty long time, especially in my like hardcore logic years. So yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for this perspective, but ultimately I have come to disagree with it. But before moving on, I just want to take a quick moment to thank today's sponsors, Squarespace. If you're looking to build a website, then you'll know it can be a real pain. First, you have to find a domain name and then construct the entire thing, and there's always this words in the same way. We have this term reading that for a lot of people is restricted to
philosophical hot take.
The activity that is, having written words in front of website or a domain name. But anyway, back to the video. Our next hot take is from Abigail R4672, and it reads, "The whole audiobooks don't count as reading debate is so pedantic and, in my opinion, ultimately boils down to the need to feel superior to others. Oral storytelling is intrinsic to the human experience, and it's so disappointing to see it so readily devalued. While I acknowledge that listening and reading comprehension are two different skills that must be developed separately, works like the Epic of Gilgamesh and Beowulf have not survived all this time only for book snobs to call listening to stories cheating." I think this is like a medium hot take. It might be a hot take. I see a lot of people really down on audiobooks. I'm quite pro audiobooks. I think that they're a very different way of engaging with things, but I don't see any reason why. There's no reason to demean them. I quite often listen to audiobooks in the gym or on walks. I think it's great. I don't see any reason to like write them off. I think that this might.
No, I'm gonna give my opinion on this, but I'm gonna have to go back because they already. I guess he moved on from the topic that I was already just talking about. But it is related. Both topics. The first one was related to he mentioned something about Jesus Christ, but I don't remember right now why he brought that up. The new topic is about audiobooks not being considered what's the word? Audiobooks are not teaching people how to learn ideas because someone is reading it, and it's not the same thing as reading as opposed to hearing someone talk about it. That's what that's what he's saying. Well, my opinion is the only reason this is even like a topic or a hot take that people have, it's because people are noticing the effects of the development of technology or just different forms of mediums of technology. At one point, books and pages were more scarce and they were not even existing. So I think that the hot take is not because reading itself is the only way to learn or have a good idea, it's because they're not used to it historically. Like, people are not used to they're not used to people learning in an oral fashion, because everything became about books. Like, if you were to consider that it's more prevalent now, it's more like reading and hearing are two separate mediums of perception. Like, if you are not able to read, at one point you could not learn, and therefore you were considered dumb. That's probably where the idea that reading means being smart, that's not true. What's true is learning makes people more educated. The medium used to be books, reading, because that was the only way to mass produce a workforce or an education, or just people learning stuff, because there was no internet. There was no way to record people, to have video recordings, and now there is. And so I find it very interesting, the evolution of ideas, because they are extremely tied to the development of humankind and history. It's history itself. So visual learning or audio learning is, and what I mean by visual, I mean by videos. I don't mean by, I don't, because technically books is a form of visual learning, but it's not a video. So anything like, audio books and even video based learning is still a good way to learn. But I guess the hot take is that people considered at one point that reading is what makes you smart. So therefore, if you are listening to a book, then you are cheating somehow. I would imagine that the plus. Here's the thing. It's not that you're dumber for listening to audiobooks. It's that there is a different skill set required to learn. For example, if you read, when you read, it's not just that you have to be able to have eyesight to read something. There's more to that. I think reading requires something, or my opinion here is that there is a different skill set involved in learning through reading, but that's only because so the fact that reading is historically something that has been done in the past, people have a habituation or a practice that reading things in the past is a way to be smart. Where am I going with that? Reading conjures up an idea of I think being younger. Reading conjures up an idea of learning for the first time words and concepts and symbols of, symbols are words. Words are just concepts in your head. The actual thing on the paper is a symbol. And people are used to hardcore learning, meaning like that they had a difficulty learning a new vocabulary term, for example, through reading historically, and therefore they feel a sense of challenge. They feel a sense of hardship because, for example, when I was like a baby and I was reading college books for whatever, for whatever class that was, the reading portion was difficult because the vocabulary was more advanced, and therefore you feel this sense of this is very challenging, as opposed to maybe hearing a audio book. But the truth is, just because you hear an audiobook doesn't mean that you understand the concepts or even the vocabulary that is being used. So it really just, I don't think that audiobooks or actual books are better than the other. It just depends on the context of whatever you're learning or where you are at in your learning of that thing. And so that is tied again to the evolution of ideas throughout time and the development of things in history. And so I kind of wanted to go back to the point that I was trying to make earlier, that I've noticed that in my point of view, you can have more things in common with someone 200 years from now than 2,000 years ago. Why do I say that? Because the impact of innovative technologies and medicine has yet really to be discovered. It is happening in real time. And if, for example, if Hitler was alive today, he would definitely have loved every single body detecting technology or spyware technology, because it would have made killing the Jews way easier. And therefore, and other people. But my point is, technology, everything new that is being imagined and created and produced will always in real time show its negative effects, because people are not using those things in a harmful way yet. They have to find a way to use it in a way that could harm someone, and then other people have to notice that it's harming. Just like people didn't know that concentration camps were existing until they realized that they were. Everything develops in real time. And so all of these things, the impact of for example, the development of vaccines in that example, it is being some people are against it, and therefore there is a measles outbreak. So that is just showing that because of these impacts of literal existence itself, the development of new things in existence itself, we are more likely to have things in common with people in the future than people in the past, because those people did not have access to running water from a faucet. I don't think. Maybe they did, but it was a more primordial, it was a more ancient form of technology if they did in the times of Jesus Christ. Also, there is more, okay, let's talk about the shellfish part. There is more seafood available today, even if some species go extinct, because there are more people fishing. There are more people fishing, and therefore there are more availability of shellfish to people. Maybe back then, eating shellfish was like some sort of omen, it was just bound to make people be unwell. And maybe that's why the idea that shellfish should not be eaten was originated. It could have been because of that, in my point of view, and not because of some sort of celestial, supernatural thing that eating shellfish is like something that is taboo or a sin. I'm not exactly sure why it's labeled that way, but that's an example used. And so because those people 2,000 years ago, I consider them dumber than people alive today, it makes believing fundamentalist perspectives really difficult to even accept because it was written by people who I believe were flawed. I think the separation between a fundamentalist Catholic or Christian, or just people who are not fundamentalists, you have to like think that the past is somehow superior or more worthy of being worshipped, or that they are more intelligent. And I'm not saying that they couldn't have had intelligence. I mean, the reason we have numerical systems today is because thousands of years ago people discovered things like that, like an abacus or arithmetics, math. All of those things were discovered in the past, and they had intelligence, but they did not have the intelligence of today. And so I think one reason to not really believe in a fundamentalist perspective is because you would think that people back then were flawed human beings writing from the perspective of people 2,000 years ago, and therefore less intelligent and less educated overall. So it is always going to be important with any type of innovative phenomenon that you consider how will this because people do create things out of expecting a change. Electricity was invented in a way to have light after dark, but even then I am sure they were not expecting that electricity would be used to power car vehicles. Probably not. So everything that is being created, not just today, but 200 years from now, will always require real-time redirection or reassessment of what is the impact of these things in the world. And so that's my philosophical hot take, like idea that people like people from 2,000 years ago are given a little bit too much credit, in my opinion. They're not as intelligent or as deserving of worship just because this idea that they were getting premonitions or visions or concepts divinely ordained from out of nowhere. That is why I guess I just don't have a fundamentalist point of view in life, and that people that do are probably more like the written word that is on the books. It's because on the Bible, it's because these people had these divine concepts given to them by a celestial higher power. But if that were true, then they would also be more omnipotent in their knowledge than they were. And we know that that's not true because we know that they did not have a way to cure illnesses, for example. Like one of the miracles of Jesus Christ was to cure like the blind, let's say, for that example. That was a power that was given admiration because of the narrative. Because of the narrative that back then, if your lifespan were to be harmed, if you were to face your mortality, there may not have been some sort of way to cure your whatever it was that you were going through, and therefore you would rely on the belief or the false belief of like, I don't know what the word is, but fake doctors, like supernatural doctors, like they just like say like, and I guess this includes priests, but not just priests, like just the entire idea of like psychics and mediums and like supernatural stuff. Like all of that is very fascinating to people, but you would have to rely on this concept of prayer because it's like you're trying to appease the gods of weather malformations. Like what if there was an earthquake? What if we had a flood? What if Like, all of these things are tied to the survival of babies and children and families and cities and towns. And if were not prepared for that type of godly divine weather, then it was assured destruction. So the concept of praying might be a form of meditation that is helpful, but again, like, prayer isn't going to cure measles, for example. It won't, and therefore maybe you should just get vaccinated for measles.